Hello, my name is Angela Long, and I am the Public Affairs Committee Chairman for the Beta Sigma Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. We'd like to welcome you today to our presentation. Over the last 4 years, Alpha Kappa Alpha has committed to assisting and supporting refugees through our global impact target entitled Refugees in America Assistance Program. Through this program, our chapters partner with organizations engaged in support activities that assist refugees and their families to integrate into American life. Today, we have partnered with the Council on Islamic American Relations to provide an in-depth view into this topic. I will now turn you over to Ms. Gina Richardson, co-chairman of Public Affairs Committee, to introduce our guest presenter for today.
Good evening. I would like to introduce our speaker, Veronica Laizure. Ms. Laizure is the Civil Rights Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations, which is CAIR Oklahoma. She began her career with CAIR as the staff attorney in 2014 and then expanded her role to the Civil Rights Department. Mrs. Laizure is proud to serve on the board of directors for the ACLU of Oklahoma, the Oklahoma Access to Justice Foundation, and the Asian Task Force on Domestic and Sexual Violence. She is proud to serve the Muslim community of Oklahoma and to build bridges of tolerance, justice, and mutual understanding in the state that she calls home. I would like to introduce Veronica Laizure. Miss
Thank
Veronica?
you. Thank you so very much for the kind welcome and introduction to your group and for having me tonight. I'm really excited to be here, knowing that your mission is refugee services, because I think, as you know, there's a lot going on in the world of refugee resettlement here in Oklahoma City and in the state of Oklahoma as a whole. So what I'm going to talk us through tonight is some general information about Islam and Muslims in Oklahoma, because one of the first steps to providing support is educating ourselves about the issues that our neighbors and our friends might be going through. We will be talking about some examples of Islamophobia and misconceptions about Islam, about Muslims, and about refugees. And I'll give plenty of time to share the information about what CARE Oklahoma is doing to assist our Afghan neighbors as well as other refugees in the future, we hope, and ways that you can get involved. So I will just go ahead and launch right in. I do love comments and questions. So if you have anything that comes up throughout the course of my presentation, please don't worry about holding those. Go ahead and drop them in the comments, and our lovely hostesses will let me know that there's been a question, and I'll try to address it in time. So Islam and Muslims in Oklahoma, presented by your friendly neighborhood CARE chapter. We are a grassroots civil rights and advocacy group based out of Oklahoma City and serving the entire state. We've been in operation since 2006 and really have taken off in the last few years, expanding to include things like community outreach, youth leadership, government affairs, and most recently, refugee services. But aside from the refugee products, we're also a very busy and active organization. Our community outreach department hosts days of service at the food bank, Ramadan iftars with elected leaders, and the Young Professionals Network, which is educating and empowering our Muslim young professionals to excel in their chosen fields while feeling that sense of pride in their culture and religious identity. We're so focused on civil rights because we are at our core interested in protecting the civil rights and civil liberties of the Oklahoma Muslim community, as well as religious minorities generally. So we work with victims of religious discrimination or harassment, educate the community on their rights, and generally defend the civil liberties throughout the state. Our government affairs department hosts the Muslim Day at the Capitol, which is a day for Muslims across the state to join us in the state capitol, learning about civic engagement, the legislative process, and meeting with state and local federal government officials. But we don't end on Muslim Day at the Capitol. Throughout the year, we keep people up to date on what's going on in the legislature, what's going on with campaigns for elected office, and how to be the most civically engaged person you can possibly be, voting and beyond. Our coalition building, I think, really establishes us as stars in the realm of civil rights and civil liberties and social justice broadly. And we're always so proud of our interfaith relationships that help us to teach others about the truth about Islam and Muslims and build those bridges that really help to connect our community throughout the state. So what we've been doing for our new Afghan neighbors since September 2021, when our first family started arriving, we started with sort of a phase one of welcoming folks into these new homes. Within hours of their arrival in Oklahoma City, each family was provided with a welcome meal that was catered by a local Muslim-owned restaurant, something that's hot, that's fresh, that is foods and flavors that they would be regionally and culturally familiar with, because many of these families have been traveling for long periods of time, sometimes with large families. And can you imagine the stress of having to travel through multiple airports with many children in tow, not speaking the same language as everyone around you, and also not having any cash or any money to be able to buy your kids something to eat when they get hungry? So being able to provide them upon their arrival in their short-term lodgings with a meal, I think was a really big source of comfort. We also provided each family with welcome kits that contained hygiene items, prayer rugs, Qurans, little toys for the kids to keep them entertained, blankets because people were cold in the hotel rooms where they were staying, extra hygiene items because you know that hotel soaps and shampoos are never sufficient for a family. And we made sure that they had access to healthful snacks so that the kids didn't have to go hungry waiting in between meals. We also set them up with some short-term medical and dental care, and that is an ongoing concern as some of the members of this community have not had access to adequate medical care for most of their lives. Now that all of the families have arrived, we received our last family in late February of this year. We are entering sort of what we call a phase two, helping folks get settled in. So the families are currently housed in, many of the families are currently housed in short-term lodgings that are like hotels or suites. But the goal is to get them in long-term housing, which would be an apartment or a home that fits the family. So as they're settling into their new homes, we're providing them with things like small housewares, like electric kettles, like stovetop pressure cookers, like access to delivered food that is rice and spices and cooking ingredients that they would be more familiar with as they get used to the American diet. We have a refugee resource center that's been open only a few weeks, but has already served hundreds of clients. In our refugee resource center, which is open Mondays and Wednesdays, we have clothing, we have these household goods, we have school supplies and backpacks, and we have a number of other little items that would help a family to feel more established in their new home. In particular, items of need at the Refugee Resource Center are things like maternity clothing. We have had a number of pregnancies within this new group. We met a woman who came off the plane and was visibly pregnant, and it was ascertained once she had landed and gotten settled in that she was 38 weeks pregnant and had not seen a doctor throughout the duration of her pregnancy. So providing her with the maternity items and baby items that she would need to welcome this new family member became a very high priority. As these families get settled into their long-term lodgings, their kids get enrolled into the public school system. And so we've been setting them up with school backpacks packed with everything that they'll need to walk right into their classroom. We had the special month of Ramadan just recently. And so we provided each family that had entered long-term lodgings with a little gift to commemorate the start of this very special holy month, as well as an Eid festival for the families still in short-term lodgings at the end of the month. And that was a really special occasion. We had around 650 people joining us kind of outside in the parking lot of one of the short-term lodging facilities where the families had been housed. We had food, we had music, we had games and toys for the children. We had snow cones, which snow cones for like 450 small children was a project to clean up, I will tell you. And people were able to celebrate and kind of feel really comfortable in a way that I don't think they've been able to enjoy for quite some time. They had set up a speaker and some music playing in the parking lot, and some young men were outside kind of dancing. They were celebrating because this is a really special religious time. And some of the women were inside watching them, and they were smiling and they were so happy. And they told me through an interpreter, we haven't seen these young men this happy in a really long time. And so providing that welcome and that sense of we are glad that you're here. We're glad that you're our new neighbors. We're glad to welcome you, I think has been such a rewarding part of the Refugee Resettlement Project and our contribution there. And as we enter this phase three, fully welcoming the Afghan community into the larger Oklahoma community, we're working with schools and employers and care providers on cultural and religious competency. Imagine if you had to go to a doctor, but the doctor did not know anything about how to speak to you in a respectful tone. If you went to school or to work and people didn't understand that you needed special consideration for your religious needs. So we're making sure that people are better educated about the needs of Islam, of the Muslim community. We have ongoing cultural education as well for our Afghan friends to help them understand the strange new culture that they have entered into. For example, in Afghanistan, there's a very strong bargaining culture where you would expect to go to a marketplace, identify the goods that you wanted to purchase, and then bargain down to a price that makes sense for you and the vendor. However, if you try to do that at Target or at Ross or at Dillard's, you're probably not going to have the same relationship with that vendor. And so people are so used to having their entire lives work in a certain way that it can be really hard to break those patterns. But that's what we're trying to do, is explain to them Target is not trying to rip you off specifically, but you can't bargain down the price of the items that you want here. We encourage entrepreneurship. We found already that this is a very entrepreneurial community, and some of them have entered our communities as doctors in their home countries, as dentists, as engineers. Trying to figure out reciprocal licensure across a language barrier is a challenge, but I think it's something that will be very empowering. A big concern is immigration status. So these folks, within 1 year of their arrival on US soil, will have to adjust their immigration legal status through a very limited series of means, all of which are time consuming and expensive. So helping them to be able to do that, if we have any lawyers in this group, would love to loop you in on the Afghan legal network and the work here to secure immigration status. We're very interested in empowering the young people in this group. So those of you with youth leadership experience, especially with women and girls, we really want to encourage these young people to grow up feeling very confident in their religious and cultural identity and being ready to take their place as kind of the next generation of civil rights and civil liberties leaders, both for their home community as well as for the state of Oklahoma. And all of those things that set someone up for long-term success: homeownership, planning for higher education, general financial health in a culture that isn't as familiar. We're trying to make sure we're meeting all of those little gap filling needs. All of the things that would make somebody not just survive, but thrive, those are the places that CAIR Oklahoma tries to be. And trust me, we have ways to plug any volunteer with any skill set into any of these aspects of our work in this community. So just feel free to reach out. So I want to start a little bit of kind of an Islam 101 presentation, just to ascertain what you already know about Islam and Muslims and what we still have to learn together. So true or false, 25% of American Muslims were born in the US. And we won't have time, unfortunately, for me to do a true Q&A, but just think about it. And for those of you who maybe have cameras on or can share your screen, give me like a hands up if you think it's true. Keep your hand down if you think it's false, and maybe do a little shrug if you're unsure. So 25% of American Muslims were born in the US. Next question, true or false? Muslims worship the same God as people of the Jewish faith. True or false? This one is often a little challenging for folks. True or false that only women have to dress modestly in Islam? True or false that Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world? Is it true or false that Muslim men do not shake hands with women? And finally, true or false, do Muslims must pray 6 times daily? So I asked a couple of tricky ones here. It's actually true that 36% of American Muslims are born in the United States. So while the stereotype is of a heavily immigrant or heavily foreigner community, that doesn't accurately reflect the American Muslim population. It is true that Muslims, Christians, and Jewish people all worship the same God as part of what's called the Abrahamic faith traditions. And I am no theologian, but I can connect you to the folks who have that information if you'd like to learn more about the commonalities between Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. It's false that only women have to dress modestly in Islam, and this is one of the strongest misconceptions that continues on about this community. Both women and men are encouraged to observe principles of modesty in their dress. It is true that Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world. It is occasionally sometimes true that Muslim men don't shake hands with women, but the reasons for that might surprise you. And then it's false that Muslims pray 6 times daily. It's actually 5 daily prayers. So we'll talk through a little bit about Muslims in the US and the world, as well as here at home in Oklahoma. As you can see, the world Muslim population, while it is heavily concentrated in the Middle East and North Africa, there's also a lot of Muslims in Southeast Asia and kind of the island part of Southeast Asia. So what country actually has the most Muslims in the world? lots of people would guess, maybe Pakistan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, but it's actually Indonesia. Indonesia is 99% Muslim. And so again, although the stereotype of Islam and Muslims might be of people who live in the desert, people who live in the Middle East or North Africa, that is not necessarily the true face of the global Muslim population. In America, many of Muslims in the United States were born here in this country. Many others are immigrants from various parts of the world. There are an estimated 7 million Muslims in the United States, which is about 1% of the US population, but Americans vastly overestimate how many Muslims there are in this country. A recent poll suggested that Americans believe that Muslims make up 15% of the US population rather than the close to 1% that's actually true. And Islam is one of the most diverse religions in the world. There are around 40,000 Muslims who live here in Oklahoma, about 20% of whom identify as African American. 40% of them identify as white, but that's kind of misleading because census data identifies Middle Eastern people as white, which is not an accurate reflection of their racial experiences. There are 6 mosques in the Oklahoma City metro area, 1 in Tulsa, although a new one is under construction, I'm told, and should be breaking ground here in the next few months in the Tulsa area. And under one roof in one mosque in Oklahoma City, there are 72 different nationalities, over 85 languages spoken, and hundreds of different individualized interpretations of the faith and relationships to the faith. So again, Islam is an incredibly diverse religion, and its people come from all over the world and have different relationships with their faith, with the United States, and with each other. We did a study in 2016 about Muslims in Oklahoma, and we found that Muslims as a whole, based on this group of respondents, are very big on volunteerism and serving the community. They are very civically engaged. They vote in almost every election, and we try to even boost that voter turnout more amongst the community with our government affairs department. Very highly employed in every industry in Oklahoma, but unfortunately, over a third reported having experienced harassment or discrimination in just the previous year from the survey. And so we do know that discrimination and prejudice against this community are still rampant, even despite all the hard work we've done. I'm going to go quickly over some core tenets of the faith because I'm not a theologian. If you would like to talk to religious scholars, my executive director, Adam Soltani, is a professor of world religions at OSU, and so this would definitely be his expertise. It is not mine, so I will cover the basics of what I know, and then we'll move on to the next segment. There are 5 pillars of Islam, the 5 core tenets that make someone a Muslim, no matter where you are in the world, no matter what language you speak. The first being the declaration of faith, the second being the 5 times daily prayers. The third pillar is fasting during the month of Ramadan, which we'll talk about in a minute. The fourth pillar is charity, and the final pillar of Islam is the pilgrimage to Mecca, or the Hajj, which is undertaken by Muslims at least once in their lifetime. Daily prayers take around 5 to 7 minutes, are done 5 times per day, and this is a time period during which a person cannot be disturbed or respond to questions. It's done facing the Kaaba in Mecca, Saudi Arabia, which is roughly northeast in North America. And it's usually performed on a prayer rug or mat because the prayer, as you can see from this photo, involves some movements that include touching one's head to the ground. And so most people like to have a special prayer rug or mat on which they perform prayers. And these are items of very high religious significance that need to be treated with respect. Before prayers is a ritual washing or wudu. It's a way of cleansing oneself both physically and spiritually before you make that special connection with God. Interestingly, in the 13th and 14th century, when the Black Plague was sweeping across Europe, Muslims and Jewish people both place a very high premium on personal cleanliness and involve washing and cleanliness in their daily rituals. And so while diseases of poor hygiene were growing wildly in communities where that was not true, Jewish and Muslim communities often did not see the same spread of these diseases, which of course marked them as targets for religious hatred during that really sad period of history. But we did not see the same decimation of populations due to these diseases of hygiene in Islam and Judaism that we saw in Christianity. So prayer is an important opportunity for Muslims to take some time out of their day and reconnect with God. It's a way of being a little bit more centered as you move through the daily actions of just your life. They take place at 5 times, depending on the position of the sun in the sky. So they change slightly throughout the year. We have a dawn prayer, there's a noon prayer, afternoon, sunset, and then a nighttime until the dawn. And these are not, while there are general times when these prayers are expected to be performed, it's not emergency. So someone, if they're performing open heart surgery, they're not going to stop performing surgery in order to perform prayers. If they're flying a plane, they're not going to stop flying the plane in order to pray. They'll wait until they land, take a few minutes to themselves, complete the prayer, and then go right back to what they were doing. The Muslim day for congregational prayer is Friday. And it's Jummah prayer, which consists of a short being relative to what the imam or the religious leader feels like. Some days it's short, some days it's longer, depending on what's on his mind that day. It is considered mandatory for Muslim men and optional but encouraged for Muslim women. The reason being that when Islam was an emerging religion, women often were expected to be in the home with multiple kids. And prayer would be a hardship trying to get all of the kids together to travel to a mosque or Islamic center, which is the house of worship, and then travel back home. And so the Prophet Muhammad did not want this to be an additional burden on women. So it was encouraged that women travel for prayers, congregational prayers, but not if it is an additional hardship to their life. It takes place at a mosque or masjid and lasts about an hour. Here we have services that run from 2 services, usually from like 12:30 to 1:30, and then from 2 to 3 p.m. And then after Jummah prayer, people will return to whatever they're doing. The month of Ramadan is a 30-day period. During this month, Muslims do not eat or drink, they don't smoke or engage in any of those kind of sensory pleasures from right before dawn, before the sun comes up, all the way until the sun goes down. Before dawn, there's a meal called suhoor, which is where people will drink lots of water, consume lots of those calories so they'll make it through the day. And then each sundown, the fast is broken by a special dinner called an iftar. Iftar celebrations are big social occasions. It's a time for family and community to gather together to celebrate what they've experienced during this holy month. And it's also a time when the Muslim community will share Ramadan traditions with the rest of non-Muslim community. We typically host at least 2 iftars throughout the month of Ramadan. One where we invite elected leaders to share in the breaking of the fast with us. One where we celebrate young professionals, in particular the young professionals who've really distinguished themselves over the past year. And one where we welcome kind of the interfaith community to experience what Ramadan is like through the eyes of a fasting Muslim. And really just kind of share in the breaking of the fast with special foods and desserts and some of those traditions that people bring from all over the world. The fast is considered obligatory for all adult Muslims past the age of puberty, except for those whose health will be harmed by the fast. So those who are sick, who are pregnant or breastfeeding, those who, again, have any health conditions that would make it harmful to their health to fast, they are not required to do so. So when Ramadan occurs changes year by year because Islam follows a lunar calendar. So the month of Ramadan moves backwards in the year by approximately 11 days each year. You can see here that I did not update this slide. I missed this slide, and it has the 2021 dates on it instead of 2022. So in 2021, Ramadan took place from approximately April 12th to May 12th. This year it was April 1st, 2nd, running until May 2nd and 3rd. Again, this is a very special spiritual time for the Muslim community. It's something that increases community connectedness and relationships to God. It also reminds people to be thankful for the blessings that they enjoy in their life, and it's a time of increased charity and prayer. So at the end of Ramadan, there's a holiday called Eid al-Fitr, or Feast of the Fast, that takes place to commemorate the end of that month. This year it took place on May 3rd, 4th-ish, and so that was when we hosted our gigantic Eid celebration for our Afghan neighbors. We will have another Eid coming up here in July at the end of the Hajj period. We'll talk about Hajj in a moment. And this will be another opportunity for the Muslim community to celebrate kind of what almost accounts to like the Muslim New Year. It's like the end of one calendar cycle and the beginning of another. So how you would greet a Muslim client or friend on an Eid holiday is Eid Mubarak, or blessed holiday, or blessed Eid. Charity is required as a part of being a Muslim. Each year, Muslims with savings are obliged to give 2.5% of those at a minimum to those who are less fortunate, because Islam as a religion is very focused on protecting the needy and ending injustice wherever it occurs. The Hajj pilgrimage is something that should be undertaken by each adult Muslim at some point in their life. It includes traveling to Saudi Arabia, circling the Kaaba, which is a holy site, the most holy site in the world for Muslims. This occurs during the last month of the Islamic lunar calendar, and it's considered obligatory for adults who are physically and financially capable of undertaking the journey. So someone is supposed to avoid going into debt or taking out loans in order to perform Hajj. It's something that you should be able to take care of yourself. Dietary restrictions, because we're coming up on dinner time. Food is always a good thing to talk about, right? So Muslims follow a couple of minor restrictions on what they consume. There are foods that are considered haram or prohibited, and that includes pork and pork byproducts. So not just the obvious things like ham or bacon or sausage, but also pork byproducts. So a lot of gelatin is porcine in origin. And so we have to be very careful about things like gel caps, like candies that are made with gelatin, because many families will object to the pork ingredients that might potentially be in those things. Haram is also anything made with alcohol. So not just consumption of alcohol itself, but also things made with alcohol, tiramisu, beer battered fish, certain wine sauces. Even though the alcohol content cooks out of those things during the cooking process, it's more about consuming something that is potentially an intoxicant. And so most families will choose to just stray away from things that are made with alcohol. Some families take it another step and will prefer to consume only meat that is zabiha, or that has been slaughtered according to Islamic codes. That's very similar to kosher restrictions on the diet. On the other side is anything that is halal or permitted, everything that's okay. So that's basically everything else, right? Other kinds of meat, fish and seafood, vegetables, legumes, grains, all of that good stuff. It's just we stay away from the pork byproducts, and alcohol. Clothing and dress is a source of a lot of misconceptions and confusion. So I do want to make sure we spend some time talking about that. Many women who are Muslim choose to wear a hijab, which is a loose kind of scarf, often, or piece of cloth that covers the head, neck, and chest. The way that women style the hijab depends widely on culture and personal preference. But hijab does not only mean the physical piece of cloth. Hijab is also used to refer to the general sense of modest comportment around people of a different gender from oneself. In the Quran, which is the religious text, the word of God as it was transmitted to the Prophet Muhammad, the Quran mentions men's behavior before it mentions what women should or should not wear. In the Quran, men are told that if they cannot behave respectfully around women, that they must lower their gaze, that they must treat the women in their community respectfully before it says anything about how women should dress. So there's also considered to be no compulsion in religion. So under religious theology, it is not acceptable to force women to dress any particular way. It should be up to the individual. And so some women choose to wear hijab only when they're at prayers in the mosque or in their homes. Others, whenever they're out in public, especially when they're around people of different genders from themselves. And there's a lot of variation in personal preference. So some people take hijab to mean covering their entire arms and legs, or to wear long skirts or robes such as an abaya rather than wearing trousers. It depends very widely on how an individual feels about manifesting their personal relationship with God. But in Islam, there is no forcing women to dress a certain way. That is a cultural, political, and social restriction. It is not something that is supported by the religion. I don't think it's a surprise to any of us in this conversation that men who want to control women will find any sort of religious justification to do so, but that does not make it a core belief of the religion. And so when people say that Muslims force women to dress a certain way, I want to make very clear that Islam as a religion does not do so. Islam as a religion encourages men to lower their gaze and be respectful before it makes any suggestion about how women should dress or behave themselves. So these are some examples of how you might see hijab understood and styled across the world. There are many people who associate only the niqab or the burqa with Muslim women, but depending on where a person is from or what their personal preference is, there's so much variation in how religious head coverings are worn. And religious ideas about modesty and clothing apply to men too. So Muslim men often will choose to be covered from the navel to the knee. So you won't see a lot of really short shorts on men in this population. Many Muslim men choose to wear a head covering called a kufi, although that tends to be a cultural thing more than in some communities more than others. And many Muslim men choose to wear a beard or grow their facial hair to follow the emulation of the Prophet Muhammad. So when we were first receiving some hygiene kits packed for this particular, our Afghan friends, many of those hygiene kits for men contained shaving cream and a razor, assuming that the men would prefer to have clean shaven faces, and that would be something that they would feel most comfortable with. But we found out that what was really preferred was actually beard trimmers, because most of the men are not comfortable with or familiar with having a completely clean shaven face. They would prefer to have some facial hair and it just be able to be nicely trimmed. And so that became an item that we really wanted to have lots of donations of those so that we could accommodate what people would be the most comfortable with as they settle into their new communities. So for those who are past the age of puberty, Islam encourages certain parameters for conduct with members of different genders as a form of showing respect to that person's relationships. So part of the principles of modesty is sometimes that people will prefer not to have physical contact. So they might prefer not to shake hands with someone of a different gender from themselves. I mean, also we're still in a global pandemic. Probably we should be making sure to give each other our own physical space, regardless of religion. But we found the best practice is to simply wait for a Muslim person to offer a hand to shake before you assume that they're going to be comfortable with that. Many Muslims, particularly those who were born and raised in the United States, are perfectly comfortable with handshakes, and they'll run up and give people hugs. They're going to be so happy to meet with their friends. But others will feel a little bit more comfortable with some more personal space. And so it's just a good idea to always respect that people may not be as friendly as we're used to in the United States. So we're going to transition here into talking a little bit about Islamophobia and some of the misconceptions. I did want to pause briefly if we had any comments or questions or issues coming up before I moved on, but I'm not seeing anything.
So far, no questions yet.
Okay, great. So I'm sure you've all heard many misconceptions that Islam promotes terrorism, that Islam is inherently sexist, anti-feminist, that Muslims want to overthrow the Constitution and institute dangerous Sharia law to invade our shores, that Muslims hate Christians, Jewish people, Buddhists, atheists, everyone who isn't a Muslim. If you can't see that on the screen, it says, all I need to know about Islam I learned on 9/11. We've all probably heard that jihad means holy war against non-Muslims. This sign, if you can't read it all that well, says every real Muslim is a jihadist. And then the t-shirt he has on behind that says Allah is Satan. And we've all probably heard the stereotype that Muslim men are polygamists. So of course, these are all very, very common misconceptions. Islam does not promote terrorism. Islam is not inherently sexist or anti-feminist. In fact, in the 7th century AD, when Islam was growing as a religion, it was pretty famous for granting women rights and recognizing their rights to own their own property, to inherit independent of their husbands, to divorce a husband who was abusive and retain custody of children, and was actually very progressive for the time that it was growing, for its recognition of women's inherent rights. And this was approximately around the time that the Christian world was still trying to figure out if women had souls or not. So for its time, when the growth of Islam was actually very progressive and very feminist in recognizing the inherent dignity of women. Muslims do not want to overthrow the Constitution and institute Sharia law. Sharia law is a word that simply means a path or a way. It's basically just a code or a guidelines for how to live a good and healthy and contributing life. It is not something that is intended to overthrow the Constitution. In fact, one of the tenets of Sharia law is that Muslims follow the law of the land where they live. So one of the tenets of Sharia law is literally that you cannot overthrow the Constitution because that's the law of the land where you live. So rather than trying to overthrow the Constitution, Sharia law says you cannot do that, right? Muslims do not hate Christians or Jewish people or Buddhists or atheists. I am not a religious person myself, and I have been living and working in this community for 8 years, and have not once felt unsafe or felt targeted for my faith or lack thereof. Most of the time, the dangerous folks are not Muslim. I tell people all the time that the most dangerous thing I've experienced in the Muslim community is how much food they will feed you in one sitting and let you consume. They will just keep putting food on a plate and just let you just keep eating. The real danger is how many carbs they will serve in one meal and expect you to finish, is really what's happening in this community. Jihad does not mean holy war. Jihad is a word that simply means strive or struggle. The great jihad, or the big jihad that every Muslim holds in their life, is the struggle to be a good person, whatever that might mean at a particular point in time. You might hear a student say, my jihad is to get straight A's this semester, right? You might hear a Muslim mom say, my jihad is to raise good children without killing them because they're getting on my nerves, right? Jihad is whatever makes you and your community better and healthier. It does not mean holy war. And while polygamy is allowed in some Muslim majority countries, there are often very strict parameters around how a person might come to marry multiple women. And usually that's practiced in situations where women do not have economic power. And so it's a way to ensure that widows or orphans or women who are struggling are able to benefit from the collective wealth of that family. Obviously, it's not always practiced exactly in that way, but polygamy, as it's understood in the Muslim community, is not intended to be an inherently abusive experience. So where do these ideas about Islam and Muslims come from? Where do these stereotypes come from? We believe that there are three main sources, the first being politicians. Unfortunately, there are many unscrupulous politicians who use their platforms to spread fear. The person you see on your screen is former Representative John Bennett, who spent much of his career in the state house demonizing Muslims and Islam as a religion and calling for its eradication. Unfortunately, there are many pundits. The popular media, as well as news media, often only shows a one-dimensional picture of the Muslim community. And the pulpit. There are unfortunately many religious figures who reject the idea of religious tolerance and instead would prefer to antagonize others who don't believe the same way that they do. So this photo was not taken in Oklahoma City, but a church in Oklahoma City did have this sign outside of their community that says, heaven is real, hell is hot, Muhammad is dead, and Jesus is not. And interestingly, if this religious leader had actually spoken to a Muslim, they would find that Muslims would agree with most of the stuff on this sign. Muslims believe that heaven is a real place where righteous people will go after they have been judged at the end of their life. They do believe that hell is a lake of fire where sinners are punished for wrongdoing. They believe that the Prophet Muhammad is dead, having passed away at the end of a long and fruitful life. The only particular point of contention is the arising of Jesus as a savior, but they do revere Jesus as a prophet, one of the most important prophets in the entire religious tradition. So if this person had chosen to speak with a Muslim, he might have found more points of commonality than points of difference. I won't read all of the things on this slide, but unfortunately, Americans believe some really troubling things about Islam and about Muslims, about their participation in civic life, their eligibility to run for certain offices. Many Americans believe that Islam is inherently at odds with American values, that it's more dangerous, more likely to encourage violence. But really important to know is that 6 in 10 Americans out of this study said that they seldom or never have had an interaction with a Muslim. So if the only thing you know about Islam and Muslims is the one-dimensional picture painted for you on your TV screens and the false memes that are spread on social media about this community, you might have these negative feelings too if you've never actually had a chance to have them challenged. So I'm going to redirect to talk about our Afghan friends, because I'm sure you've all heard some pretty negative things about Afghan refugees, right? Former representative and current chair of the GOP, John Bennett, has said that they're unvetted enemies of the U.S., has called Islam a cancer in our nation that needs to be cut out. U.S. Senate candidate Jackson Laizure said that these folks were bringing child brides and terrorism to Oklahoma, that they're unvetted, and basically reiterating that they are dangerous and that they are not wanted in the Oklahoma community. When we know that the facts say something completely different. Women and children make up over 80% of the displaced Afghans since January 2021. And that tracks here in Oklahoma City. Children under the age of 18 are 65% of the Afghans who have resettled in Oklahoma City. More than 7 out of 10 Americans agree that resettling the Afghans who work with US government, military, or other agencies should be resettled, that this is work that should be done. And every refugee, including this group of folks, has to come here after passing strict security vetting, biometric and health screening, and very strong background checks. In fact, refugees actually undergo the most stringent background checks of any other community of immigrants, and they are the least likely statistically to be a source of any sort of terroristic or white supremacist or other violence that targets non-combatants. So the stereotypes about Afghan refugees suggest that they are a very dangerous population, when the facts are that these are women and children, largely people who supported the US military during the 20 years that the military was present in Afghanistan, and who have now come to the US only after having passed these very strict security background checks and vetting that every refugee has to go through. So the general status, and this is a little bit out of date, but they haven't released new data. So I think it all still tracks. We've received just over 1,000 Afghans to Oklahoma City and a little bit over 800 in Tulsa. And the Tulsa numbers include some 40 or so who were settled to Stillwater. Again, over 60% of our arrivals are kids under the age of 18. This number is a little incorrect. And we have had a number of pregnancies and newborns, brand new Oklahomans, as part of our Afghan friends. So the challenges of the community, as I'm sure you can imagine, are many. Transportation being the first one. We've experienced significant delays in getting these folks driver's licenses, so getting them to crucial appointments or even something as simple as going down to the convenience store for a snack is nearly impossible when you don't have a car and don't understand our bus system. And I've lived in Oklahoma City for like almost 9 years, and I don't understand our bus system. So, and I speak the language, so I can only imagine the struggle that these folks are going through. Health and challenges. It was really difficult to adjust to a completely new diet. One of the things that we noticed was that the initial donations of snack food included things like chips and cookies, thinking that kids would be really excited to get these items. But these kids are not used to the high levels of salt and sugar in American snack foods. And so they were not at all interested in the potato chips. They wanted things that were more familiar to them, like nuts, like dried fruit, the more healthy snacks. They did not want the potato chips. And so we really had to kind of reevaluate the snack packs that we were sending over to the short-term lodgings, because we just were not able to keep up with that demand at first. Health challenges, again, are considerable. Again, we've had women who are experiencing pregnancy and have not seen a medical doctor. There was a family who came to us for clothing with a 2-month-old baby who had been born on a military base as this family was awaiting their screening to be completed. And she had been in the same onesie since her birth for the 2 whole months. And they had run out of diapers on the base, so that they were washing and reusing like disposable diapers for this child. And so thankfully we were able to get them set up with clothing and blankets and a bassinet and all the things that they would need for this newest member of their family. But I can only imagine the stress that it would be trying to raise a newborn without access to any of those things that would make that possible. We also have folks who have not seen a doctor for much of their lives because they come from rural or outlying provinces, or just don't have access to healthcare in a community, in a country that's been at war. And so the language barrier is significant, making sure that we can address things like diabetes or hypertension in this community. Like I said, the language barrier, some of these folks are multilingual. They speak any one of the 20 or so languages that are commonly spoken in Afghanistan, but one of the 4 or 5 languages that they speak does not happen to be English. Some of them are not even literate in their first language, let alone the others that they might have picked up in the years that they've lived in Afghanistan. So making sure that the vital information is even understandable to them has been a huge challenge. Their papers, their documents. Many of these folks have the crucial documents that would enable them to relatively easily complete their immigration and legal status, but they burned those documents when they fled, because to be caught with documents associating yourself with the US military during the fall of Kabul would have been a death sentence if the Taliban got their hands on you. And so some of those crucial documents, things like passports, work permits, birth certificates signed by American doctors or American affiliated doctors, those all had to be destroyed or were lost when these families had to flee their homes. We met up with a family with 2 little girls. They were in their pajamas because they'd had to leave their homes in the middle of the night and were not even able to find coats for their children, let alone grab their passports, their birth certificates, their work permits, all of those documentation. They had to flee with literally nothing. Getting these kids into school and understanding the American school system has also been a challenge. Many of our newest students are not used to being in school for 8 hours a day. And so by the time they hit recess, they're ready to be done and go home. And their families don't always understand that this schooling is mandatory. It's not just encouraged, but it's mandatory for all of them. And so no, they can't just come home when they get tired. They have to stay there for the whole day. In addition, these are children who some have experienced unimaginable levels of trauma. And so expecting them to sit still and behave in a classroom where they don't know the primary language, where some of these concepts are completely unfamiliar to them, where the food, the culture, the temperature, all of those things are unfamiliar to them. That's just a very tall thing to ask of a young child who's undergone so many changes and transitions in that short time period. We've had a number of babies being born. Many of the women are not familiar with the American medical system, and because culturally they will have preferred to work with female providers, and those may have been thin on the ground in the military bases where they've presided, they just simply have not talked to a medical provider about their pregnancy at all, which of course leads to lots of complications and lots of concerns about the health of both the mother and the baby. So in Afghanistan, which as you can see kind of from this map here, is a landlocked country in South Central Asia. The most common languages spoken are Pashto, which is about 40 to 60% of the country, and Dari, which is kind of a dialect of Farsi. But there's also Uzbek, there's Hazara, there's Turkmen, there's Tajik. There are so many different languages spoken in the country. So again, many of the folks who came here speak 4 or 5 languages. They just don't happen to speak English as one of them. And Afghanistan is a 99% Islamic country, although there are some religious minorities that do face persecution, as well as ethnic minorities that face persecution both under the Taliban and under the current government. So the terminology is important to be accurate. One of the most common things that we notice is that the term for a group of people from Afghanistan, or the adjective, is Afghan, not Afghani. Afghani is the currency. So for those of us who speak English as a primary language, or who are using English to talk about this community, Afghan is the proper adjective and collective noun. However, it gets confusing because people who speak Arabic as their first language, for people who speak Arabic, it is Afghani. And so they're not saying it wrong, they're just using a different language convention, but properly in English, the terminology would be Afghan people, or an Afghan culture. I hope that is perfectly confusing to everyone because it took me a long time to pick it up. It's hard to read this middle one. I don't know what happened with color here, but Afghans are not Arab or Middle Eastern because Afghanistan is not in the Middle East. It is in South Central Asia. So that is a very common misconception about both Afghans and Muslims in general, that not all Muslims are Arab or Middle Eastern. And then I also like to remind myself frequently that the terminology we use matters, and we want people to be known not only as the worst thing that ever happened to them, having to uproot their lives, flee their home country without any hope of returning. And so rather than continually referring to them as refugees, I like to remind myself that they are our neighbors. They are our new friends, because that's truly what we hope that they'll be as they resettle here and they become part of that collective Oklahoma family. A couple of notes about Afghan culture before we close out. This is a culture that, despite the country having been at war for the better part of 4 decades, are very proud people. So while we might be very grateful that they are here with us, hearing someone say something like, "You must be glad to be out of that country and be here," well, they might prefer to be in their home country with a functioning and healthy government, right? And so while we might think American culture is the greatest thing on planet Earth, this community may not necessarily love hearing you disparage their home culture, right? So those derogatory statements about Islam or about the Taliban even is just not something that's going to make someone feel comfortable or safe. It's also important to know that there are still some ethnic conflicts that exist. And so just because you throw a lot of Afghans together in a room does not necessarily mean they're all going to get along automatically. Associated with kind of the honor culture and the very strong sense of pride is a strong sense of privacy. So it's always a good practice to ask permission before taking photos, and especially before posting them on social media. Some of the folks who came here are wanted by the Taliban for their work with US military or associated agencies. And so the last thing that we want to do is splash their photo all over social media or all over the news media and put them in more danger, right? And then we also know that Islamophobes will take any opportunity to target this vulnerable population. So we want to be very careful about how we share photos of people. This tends to be a collectivist culture where what happens to the person is a reflection of the community. It's also a very strong gift-giving culture. And so don't be surprised if you enter someone's home or their space, compliment an item and have it offered to you, right? Because that would be a sense of a family showing their respect for a guest. Also, please note that all these things do sort of vary by ethnicity, by region, and particularly by geography. Those Afghans who come from more metropolitan centers will be more familiar with Western kind of conventions and dress and culture. But those who come from outlying provinces who've had very little contact with the Western world, all of the things that we do will be kind of strange to them. For example, I met a couple of girls who came to the office for hygiene products, and they were from the capital, Kabul. One of them had been studying to be a lawyer, and the other was a professional working at an embassy. And they were wearing, skinny jeans and sweaters. They were dressed just like you might see your typical American young women. And so when we said, "Oh yeah, we have shampoo and body wash here. You can pick a bottle to take with you to your hotel," they immediately ran over and started opening all of the bottles to smell what the shampoo looks like. And it's like, what a relatable experience, because no matter where you're from, no matter what cultural background you have, people like to smell good, and you want to know what you're putting on your body is going to have a pleasing smell to you. We also had a family come in, and it was a dad and a wife and several girls in the family of varying ages. And we were telling them again, we have some shampoos that you can pick with you to take to your home. And he picked one big bottle and said, "Yeah, this is good. We'll take this one." And immediately all of the women came in and started yelling at him and saying, "Are you crazy? Like, we don't like this kind. You're only going to get one bottle for all 7 of us. Like, what is going through your head right now?" And he was like, "Wow." And I thought, again, like, what a relatable experience, right? People want to smell nice. They want to have products that they enjoy using. And so all of the things that might seem different about this community, about their culture and their experiences, there are these fun points of commonality that just really, to me, bring home this idea that this is all part of making our Oklahoma City family whole. This is a community where sustained eye contact will also be pretty uncomfortable. So if you're meeting with someone and they're like looking around, they're not making eye contact, they're not being shifty or disrespectful, they're actually showing that they view you as a person of higher status. Communication similarly will be more direct with people who they consider to be their own age or who are younger, but indirect with those who are more higher status. So for example, if a coworker asks them, "Hey, can we get this done?" They might say to a coworker, "Oh, I don't think so, probably not." But if a boss asks, "Hey, can we get this done?" They'll say, "Oh yeah, we'll see. We'll definitely see about doing this. I think we can do this," because they don't wish to be directly confrontational with someone of higher status. In Muslim cultures across the world, people refer to each other as brother and sister, regardless of profession or other titles. So it's a way of equalizing across the community, right? So you might go to prayers with someone who is a doctor who makes 6 figures. You might be sitting next to someone who is struggling with unemployment, who might be culturally considered of lower status, but it doesn't matter when you're in the house of worship. Everyone sits on the floor at the same exact level, and everyone refers to each other as brother or sister. It's not doctor, it's not sir, it's brother. And that is something that has always been really important in the religion, is this equalization, this ending of hierarchy that results in oppression. In fact, the greeting of one Muslim to another Muslim, no matter where you are in the world, no matter what primary language you speak, the first thing that people say to each other is "Assalamu alaikum," or "Peace be with you." And the response, again, no matter where you are, no matter what language you speak, the response is always "Wa alaikum salam," or "Peace be also with you." So it's such an important thing to remember that although the stereotypes about Islam and Muslims seem to highlight the differences, the conflicts that we might have, the first thing that Muslims wish each other all across the world, the first thing that people say to greet each other is, may there be peace for you. And the response is always, may peace also be with you. Very briefly about gender distinctions that tend to be a little bit stronger and more stringent in our Afghan community, although again, varies widely according to personal preference and culture. You'll often see that men and women will socialize separately. So you'll see the men kind of congregating in one room and the women more comfortable in a completely separate area. This just means that they'll be a little bit more open and kind of feel free to be more honest about their experiences when they're in a women-only space. If you do have to have one-on-one appointments or speaking with someone of a different gender, leave the door open, even if it's just kind of cracked a couple of inches. That's going to be more comfortable for everybody involved. Many people will not prefer handshakes or hugs at this point. As they get more comfortable in American culture, that might change, but for right now, it's best to just wait for someone else to offer that physical gesture before you reach out. Again, while polygamy is legal Islamically, there has to be certain requirements met before a man can marry multiple women. It's considered a little bit nosy for men to ask other men about female family members. So while a man might ask another man, how's your family doing? For them to then ask, how's your wife? How's your daughter? How's your other daughter? Will be seen as a little bit intrusive because that's kind of considered something that the man, it would be an implication that the man isn't taking good care of their family. Similarly, women will not prefer to be seen by male or male presenting doctors. And so that means that unfortunately in this community, pregnancy disruption is sadly very common because women who don't have access to female providers are not going to be comfortable talking about pregnancy or pregnancy related complications until it's too late. For menstrual product donations, we have found that pads are preferred over tampons or menstrual cups. And so we always welcome donation of sanitary pads because those are something that get expensive really fast. And any dollar that these families don't have to spend on some of these little essentials is a dollar that they can put towards establishing their long-term future here as our neighbors. So just like as a little bit of a review, the placement issues that we are seeing, most of these are things that can be overcome just by care and understanding and patience, right? So being patient with folks who have a low trust of the medical establishment, assuming that you are not going to be able to get their entire life story in a first meeting. Not assuming that people are immediately uneducated, because we do have some folks that were doctors, that were very well educated people in their home country. And so, ignorance of English is not ignorance, period. People will need to be assured that their privacy will be respected. And then one thing that we have found is kind of interesting about this cultural exchange is that, Afghanistan is a country that's been at war for like 40 years, right? And so punctuality is just not something that is super possible when you have to rely on public transportation, when roads might be disrupted, when your ability to get from point A to point B is never completely sure. And so people who are expecting a particular event or something to start at a specific time, give a little bit of flexibility in that planning. Understand that someone who is late is not being late because they're disrespectful. It's because culturally there's not such a high premium placed on showing up exactly at 7:30 when you say you're going to be there at 7:30, right? So when we plan events for the Muslim community, because this is very common all over the world, right? When we plan events for the Muslim community, we often say, is this at 7:30 p.m. or is it 7:30 p.m. inshallah or God willing? Which means that it could be 7:30, but it could also be 7:45. It might be a little bit closer to 8, just depending on when people show up. And so we kind of try to build that into our scheduling, the understanding that time is a little bit squishy in other cultures, and we've got to be understanding and patient with people and not take that as a sign of disrespect. With kids in particular, you'll see the varying levels of literacy. We're seeing a lot of issues with resource hoarding. And these are very often large families. We have some families that are 11 and 12 people, so mom, dad, and 10 kids sometimes, because large families are considered pretty normal in Afghan culture. And we do see early marriage and early child rearing pretty commonly, but with further education in this community, nobody really sees that as necessarily an obstacle. It's just something to note as you work with these families. That's the end of my prepared presentation. I know I covered a lot. So I am more than happy for you to reach out to me at any of this contact information. We are not a huge team. We are 3 full-time staff plus 2 part-time contract workers who are all sort of pitching in to make our refugee programs an integrated part of the larger CAIR Oklahoma program. So that being said, if you email us at this info box, or you get on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, I will get it. I will see your message somehow. I am connected to all of it. So don't worry that it will miss me. It will not miss me. I will get it. I know I've covered a lot, so I definitely want to make sure that you feel comfortable either asking me questions now or just reaching out at a future time if something comes out. But that's the end of the prepared stuff that I had for you. I am more than happy to just hang out for a little bit longer so we can chat through anything that comes up.
Wow. Thank you so much for this information. And Gina, I know you had a question earlier that you wanted to touch on regarding ways that we can assist further. So if you want to ask your question, you can go ahead.
Oh, I think I asked my questions before we came on, so I was like, "What question?" We wanted to make sure that that the sorority understands ways, and you pointed out quite a few. Pads instead of tampons, things like that, things that we can do to help donate to CAIR, and specifically in what we can do, what would be the best thing that we can do to help?
That is an excellent question, and I love it. So the first greatest thing is to donate, whether it's money or items. Even monetary donations, we're able to stretch really, really far. We were able to get wholesale donations of things like prayer rugs and Qurans with the money that came in with this new project. And so your financial donations are always, always welcome. Donations of items are always also, we could definitely never have enough. Clothing in particular, we are still accepting clothing donations, limited clothing donations right now at the Refugee Resource Center. And you can email me to set up a time for donation and a little bit more of a thorough list of what we're looking for. So when we first opened our doors to donation, we received literally like trucks and trucks full of clothing. And so we've had to kind of narrow down the clothing donations that we accept to the things that are really in high need. So shoes, gently used shoes, maternity items. We are always in need of maternity items. Those go very quickly. Things on the smaller size of the scale. We got a huge donation of men's clothing that was all in sizes like large and extra large and extra, extra large. This is for Oklahoma men who've been eating Brahms their whole life, not necessarily for a community of folks who unfortunately has been struggling with food insecurity for a country at war for 40 years. So the large and extra larges are not going to see quite as much use as the smalls and mediums. Modest apparel in general is going to be more preferred. So long, loose skirts, long flowing blouses. If you have kind of like large dresses that go all the way to the floor, those are the things that we're finding that our neighbors really accept the most of. Small housewares, there's a list on the CAIR Oklahoma website, CAIR Oklahoma. There's a page specifically on refugee resources where we have an Amazon wish list as kind of an example of the things that we really need. Yeah, donations of menstrual products, hygiene products, especially. We are getting ready to open for diaper donations because diapers are so expensive and it's become such a struggle for these families to get sufficient diapers. Diapers of particularly size 4, I think is what they said, but really any size. Those can be dropped off to the resource center. And if you have questions about that, I'd be more than happy to communicate with email about where those would be dropped off and at what time. So the second thing after donations is donations of your time. At the Refugee Resource Center, we always need additional helping hands to sort and fold and organize the clothing that we have available for these families. If you have a family of 10 coming through, including 8 children, and they're all looking for clothing, things are going to get a little bit messy. So sometimes it takes some additional hands to get everything set back to where it needs to be for the next family to come in. And we're serving sometimes 5 or 6 families a day. So all hands on deck for that is always welcome. And while the typical volunteer hours are that Monday and Wednesday, 11 to 4, if there's another day where a larger group would want to come in and do some work, we could certainly set that up. And then if you work in any of those fields, where we mentioned sort of this phase 3 work, healthcare providers, attorneys, teachers, especially people who've worked in the field of immigration, youth leadership, just people who are willing to help kind of walk alongside these families as they're going on this journey. We can use all of those skill sets, all of that empathy. And no matter what profession you're in, no matter where you work and what you do, just approaching this subject with true facts and with kindness and empathy is a tremendous thing to be able to do. I tell people that all the time. The first step is to give a heck, and you've done that by being here tonight. You've done that by coming to meet with me. The next step is to take your special skills, your superpowers, and bring that to the table as we are doing this work together.
Awesome. Wow, we received so much information today. I don't know if you saw the comments, but we had several people who just said it was a great presentation and they thanked you for providing us a little bit more knowledge about this information. There were quite a few things that you mentioned tonight that I know I didn't know. So this was a great learning opportunity. And that's what it's about for us, trying to educate people on what we're doing. And then as we're trying to serve this population, that we just be a little bit more informed and a little bit more aware so that we can serve you to the best of our ability. And so we truly appreciate you taking the time tonight to speak with us and to provide this information. If you don't mind, can you put your information slide up one more time?
Yes, absolutely. Let me see. Yep. Takes a minute, but here we go. Yeah, there's our website. The info box comes to my inbox, so I get all of those. We're very active on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. On the website, cairoklahoma.com, there's like a scrolling bank of images at the very top, and one of those is refugee services and the refugee projects. We try to update that every 2 weeks. So as things change, as we know, okay, right now we need more of this particular item, or this is a particular event coming up where we could really use more hands on deck. We try to make sure that all of that is posted to that page in particular. So that's the probably the best place to find out what's going on and what's new is our Facebook or our website.
Okay.
And then if you want to set up something specific or have any more directed questions, that info box comes right to me. So I can always answer those questions.
Okay, perfect. Well, once again, we just want to thank you for taking the time with us. Gina, do you have any further comments or anything?
I do not. So much information. I feel like I need to hold it all in, and I thank you so much for that. You did such a great job at making sure that we get the facts, and that's what's important. Thank you.
Absolutely. You're very welcome. Thanks so much for having me.
And so on behalf of Beta Sigma Omega, we thank you for your time, and we appreciate all that you're doing in your line of work. And so thank you for coming to educate us today. And if there's nothing else, if there are no other questions, then we will go ahead and end this broadcast. But thank you so much, everyone, for attending our presentation tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.